Almost every culture in the world has a legend of a great flood, one that ravaged the earth, killing all in its path but a select few.
It's not myth or legend, but it's real history.
If so, this mountain in Turkey might be the final resting place of the one great ship that survived it all, Noah's Ark.
Something is up there that fits the general description and dimensions of the Ark.
Now, armed with the latest technology, scientists are hoping to make a great archaeological find, an ancient shipwreck 17,000 feet above the sea.
Rewards are even greater.
The 17th of June 1949. Over the mountains of eastern Turkey, an American reconnaissance plane is on a routine intelligence mission. At regular intervals, the crew captures photographs of the rugged terrain below. Then, near one of the world's most famous peaks, the camera picks up something unusual, a linear-shaped object protruding from the ice cap. If this were any other mountain, it might easily be dismissed as a natural aberration. But this is Mount Ararat, the legendary resting place of Noah's Ark. For nearly 50 years, the photographs remain classified. Their recent release has reignited an age-old search.
We have the tools now. We have the satellite technology. We have ground-penetrating radar. We have a lot of high-tech stuff that we've never had before. If it's up there, somebody's going to find it.
For many, the legend of Noah's Ark is just that, a legend, a tale told to children at Sunday school. For others, it is a factual story, and many who believe that it was a real historical event are also convinced that they can find the physical evidence to prove it. Their controversial search often puts them at odds with mainstream scholars and scientists.
This would be the greatest archaeological discovery of all time. If Noah's flood happened the way the Bible says it happened, then it would have restructured the entire globe. And as a geologist, how could we possibly interpret any part of planet Earth without Noah's flood in our thinking?
John Morris is president of the Institute for Creation Research, ICR. ICR is a Christian think tank based in California. It strives to find common ground between ancient scripture and modern science.
All of us here with our PhDs in various fields of science, and yet we're all not only scientists, we're all Bible-believing Christians, and we do the research from a biblical basis, that the Bible really is true, and that's the framework within which we interpret our scientific data.
Yet for skeptics, taking the Bible at face value is the wrong approach.
You're talking about what in other people's collective story would be called myth. The reason that these people are so interested in finding the remnants of the Ark or whatever it is, some sort of evidence of that a worldwide flood occurred and that there was an Ark and all that sort of stuff, is to bolster their faith.
For those who believe, there are two avenues of exploration. One is the search for physical remains of a great ship. The other revolves around possible geological evidence left by the floodwaters that carried the Ark on its journey.
Now it's a legend, but the kernel of truth is behind that legend. That's the Great Flood.
In ancient times, stories of a great flood were widespread.
Interestingly enough, almost every culture around the world has a legend of Noah's Ark.
Thousands of years ago, there was a Babylonian tale about a king who was warned by the gods of an approaching flood. Building a boat, he protected his family and a selection of animals from the rising waters. The ancient Greeks and Romans had their own version, the story of a man and wife who saved their children and livestock by building a giant wooden box.
I've studied over 200 of these flood legends, and they all tell that same basic story about how one family survived the flood, and from that family has repopulated the world.
Something happened way back that mankind remembered because it was so disastrous. And they told their sons and their grandsons and their great-grandsons, and it spread across the earth.
Best known in Western culture is the biblical story of Noah. According to the book of Genesis, Noah was approached by God and warned that a massive flood was on its way, a flood that would wipe out all living creatures as punishment for their wickedness.
God looks on the earth and is kind of sorry that he made it all and says, I'm going to destroy this all, start over again, basically. But Noah is described as one of the few people who's walking righteously.
Noah began constructing one of the grandest ships ever built, a wooden ark 3 stories high and nearly 500 feet in length. When work was complete, he rounded up 2 animals from every species and placed them on board. As the storm waters arrived, the human crew of 8, Noah, his 3 sons, and each of their wives, climbed into the only sanctuary from the greatest storm the earth had ever seen. The storm drowned all living creatures outside the ark in a violent torrent that lasted for 40 days and 40 nights.
It covers, according to the biblical count, the whole earth, right over the highest mountain peaks.
The Bible does not specify where the ark was built or what route it might have taken, but it does provide a clue about where it landed. A mountain in an ancient biblical land called Ararat, now believed to be in eastern Turkey.
You know, the Bible doesn't specify a particular mountain on which the ark came to rest. It talks about the mountains of Ararat, and Ararat in the early days was a region. It's like saying the mountains of this particular region. Well, the mountain today that goes by the name Mount Ararat is the one prominent peak in that region.
This area surrounding Mount Ararat is considered sensitive by the Turkish government. Just getting permission to visit here is a challenge. But for those determined to find Noah's Ark, there is no other destination. Richard Reeves couldn't agree more. He believes eastern Turkey holds the key to Noah's Ark, and he is convinced that he knows where the ship is.
Well, I think the account of Noah's Ark is one of the first things we hear of when we're children. And of course, as we grow older, we're told a lot of tales, and as people grow older, many times they think that Noah's Ark is just one more of those fairy tales, but it's not.
Richard Reeves is the president of Wyatt Archaeological Research, a Christian organization dedicated to preserving one of the most controversial archaeological claims of the 20th century. They believe this mysterious shape is the remains of Noah's Ark. According to the Old Testament of the Bible, Noah's Ark came to rest in remote eastern Turkey. One group of explorers claimed that the ship has survived in its original shape to the present day. The story of the amazing discovery began in 1959. At the time, İlhan Duripınar was a captain in the Turkish army. His job involved studying photographs for a military mapping project. One day, while scrutinizing images, an odd shape caught his attention. It looked just like a ship, encased in the remote foothills of eastern Turkey. Puzzled, Captain Duripınar alerted his supervisors. Before long, news of the sighting spread.
He was in the Turkish army and identified this, this feature in one of the aerial photographs of this region and released the photograph first to the Turkish newspapers. Eventually it got reported in some U.S. newspapers.
While media attention brought a few curious visitors, no excavations were undertaken and interest soon faded. But for one young man named Ron Wyatt, the story was just beginning. He read about the curious object and decided to explore the site in person.
The boat-shaped object showed up in Life magazine, and it had an article in it. It said Noah's Ark with a question mark, and it showed a boat-shaped object there. And Ron saw that in Life magazine. He decided to go over and check it out.
Located 18 miles to the south of Mount Ararat, the site was named Durypina after the army captain who first spotted it. Like many others, Ron Wyatt found its uncanny resemblance to a large ship hard to ignore. But beyond outward appearances, another striking coincidence came to light. According to the Old Testament, Noah's Ark was 300 cubits long, just over 500 feet in modern measurements. When Ron Wyatt measured the Durypina formation, it was an almost perfect match. Convinced he was on the right track, Ron explored the surrounding countryside. Near the village of Kazan, he came across these giant stones. Weighing several tons apiece, each stone is distinguished by a large hole drilled through the top. The design is similar to drogue anchors, supposedly used in ancient times. Rather than sit on the bottom and prevent a ship from drifting, drogue anchors are pulled through the water. They provide stability in rough seas and keep a ship perpendicular to incoming waves.
It was theorized by Ron Wyatt that as Noah approached Mount Ararat and the foothills around there and saw that Noah's Ark was going to land, so to speak, he cut the ropes to the anchor stones. Of course, this is not biblical, and this is, kind of an extra biblical tale, so to speak, that the anchor stones dropped about 10-15 miles away from where he believes Noah's Ark landed on Durypina.
John Baumgartner is a physicist at the Los Alamos National Laboratory. He is a trained scientist and a Christian, and he believes the biblical account of Noah's Ark.
It's a very important part of human history, and it's a story of a discontinuity in human history and a complete new beginning. And I believe it's deeply rooted in the collective human consciousness.
In 1985, John Baumgartner was sufficiently intrigued by Ron Wyatt's work to join his expedition.
I felt like the site deserved some careful attention. Here you had a boat-shaped feature, roughly the dimensions given in Genesis for the ark, in the mountains of Ararat, in the region where the Bible indicated in general terms where the ark landed.
In 1985, the team employed a metal detector at the site, hoping to get a glimpse beneath the topsoil. Over the next few years, ground-penetrating radar and seismic scans further convinced Ron Wyatt that he was standing on the remains of Noah's Ark.
He used red plastic tape to mark the site and claimed that these lines represented internal structure of what he believed was a boat underground.
On Durypina's steep sides, these evenly spaced ribs are believed to be the fossilized remains of timbers used in the ship's hull. The precise symmetry is said to be proof that the structure is man-made.
There are things that you can see with your eyes, that you can measure between. We've done that. They measure out exactly, in certain distances between each piece and part.
During one of his visits to Durypina, Ron Wyatt took a rock sample for further study.
The piece has been analyzed several times by different laboratories, and it contains organic carbon. A lot of people have said that it's not petrified wood, that it's just a rock. But rocks don't have organic carbon, only something that was once living.
For skeptics, Durypina is the product of a sudden geologic event, such as a mudslide, something common to the region. If a wall of mud and debris struck a solid rock outcropping, it could be diverted to either side, eventually hardening into the streamlined shape seen today. At Wyatt Archaeological Research, this hypothesis has been tested. The structure at Duripinar has a point at one end, like the bow of a boat, facing uphill. But simulated mud flows produce the opposite result. The mud eventually creates a point, but on the downhill side.
Every time, it's round on the uphill side and pointed on the bottom. And what's found in eastern Turkey is just the exact opposite of that. So there's no indication that this is an obstruction in a mud flow. No matter what shape we did use for our experiment, we always ended up with a point at the bottom, not at the top.
Richard claims that this is proof that no natural event created the ship-like object. In 1987, the Duripinar site was made a national park by the Turkish government, which proclaimed that Noah's Ark had finally been found. John Baumgartner, however, is not so convinced. He believes that high iron content in the soil is responsible for the patterns Ron Wyatt was able to map out on the surface.
Well, it turned out there were lots of volcanic rocks in the site. And generally, if you came close to one of those black volcanic rocks, it set off the metal detector. So my conclusion is that there was no pattern of metal there. It was just, but there were rocks with quite a bit of iron in them.
And in some of the sample drilling that was performed, bedrock was found too close to the surface.
I had to conclude that this was a natural formation. There was no room underground for any boat. To me, I was confident in the conclusion that this was not the site of Noah's Ark.
But for the custodians of Ron Wyatt's legacy, solid proof is still beneath the surface, waiting to be unearthed.
We'd like to do some excavation. For years and years, people have said a decision cannot be made until excavations are done. Well, one of our biggest obstacles that's proven this is Noah's Ark is to get permits from the Turkish government. We believe that with just minor excavations, we can prove that the structure there is not natural, but that it is man-made.
While some believers search for the remains of Noah's Ark, others look for proof of the flood. And occasionally, modern science and religion touch on common ground. Not far from Mount Ararat, geological evidence points to one of the largest floods in history. One powerful enough to give birth to the legend. According to the Old Testament, after surviving the Great Flood, Noah's Ark came to rest in the ancient region of Ararat, in what is now eastern Turkey. Yet when it comes to the Ark, the Bible is often one thing, and hard science another. William Patterson is a geologist. Like many scientists, he is skeptical about the existence of an actual Noah's Ark.
Some of these biblical stories may have scientific fact as a basis, and some may not. In science, we're required to build ideas step by step and prove ourselves along the way. Every step must be proven before you take another. In the creationist world, you are basing all of your thoughts and evidence on a single written source.
Yet discoveries in Dr. Patterson's field do point towards a geological event that may have given birth to the legend. Around 200 miles from Mount Ararat, the Black Sea is a body of salt water that spans the entire northern border of Turkey. Today, its waters are tranquil, and resorts along the coast draw visitors from around the world. But according to recent fossil evidence, this sea was once a series of much smaller freshwater lakes. At the end of the last ice age, however, there was a sudden, dramatic change. As the Earth warmed, sea levels began to climb. In the Mediterranean, this rising water began to push its way through the Bosphorus.
The initial breach of the rim may have been gradual, but once essentially the floodgates have opened, it would be a very dramatic shift in the flow of water into the Black Sea from the Mediterranean.
The force of the water entering the Black Sea basin is estimated to have been 200 times as strong as Niagara Falls.
It's been projected that you could hear this from 60 miles away. And of course, a huge cloud of mist would be generated that would be seen from a long way off.
According to the Bible, the flood lasted 40 days and 40 nights, the approximate time geologists believe it would have taken to fill the Black Sea basin. For any human settlements along the shores, the consequences would have been devastating.
It would be a very surprising thing, literally a catastrophic event that would force them from the lakeshore. It would definitely appear to be the end of the world for people who live in the region. Perhaps some divine punishment or wrath of the gods.
The Black Sea flood occurred approximately 7,500 years ago. Looking at evidence throughout Europe, archaeologists believe it had a tremendous impact on human migration. Fleeing the waters, communities traveled up the Danube River Valley into Europe and south into the Holy Land, taking their way of life and the story of the great catastrophe with them.
It's possible that the Black Sea flood has served as an origin for the story of Noah's flood, in that it was very dramatic. It's in the right place, perhaps at the right time, and it's the type of dramatic story that will be passed on from generation to generation.
For strict biblical adherents, there is a problem with this modern interpretation. While clearly catastrophic, the Black Sea flood was limited to a single region of the globe. For those who believe in the Old Testament version, the answer must lie elsewhere.
They found a flood, but it wasn't a big one. The very purpose of that flood was to wipe out the world that existed in Noah's day. This was a global flood, a world restructuring flood.
Few people have done more research into the possibility of a global flood than geologist David Phillips. He considers himself a catastrophist. Catastrophists believe the Earth's surface has been formed by sudden, violent events, rather than gradual geological processes. They are on the fringe of mainstream science.
We maintain that a lot of water did extensive geologic work over a short period of time, catastrophically inundating the world that then was.
According to Phillips, one of the best examples of this theory can be seen in Petrified Forest National Park in Arizona. Just 50 miles from the border with New Mexico, the park encompasses nearly 100,000 acres of land and is home to the largest collection of petrified wood on the planet. Tens of thousands of fossil trees strewn across the desert floor. At one end of the park, there are trees buried to a depth of 300 feet. One prevalent theory among geologists is that these trees were fossilized by volcanic ash, common in the soil. But for David Phillips, the complete absence of branches and root systems is evidence of a cataclysmic event, the Great Flood.
Some of these trees are over 200 feet long with diameters of up to 10 feet. What should be right here and right here are branches from this tree that would have shot out. As you can see, these have been ripped out of the socket where the branch actually existed. This demonstrates that these trees were ripped up from their original location and washed into location hundreds or thousands of miles away.
The northern end of Petrified Forest National Park reaches into a collection of mesas, buttes and badlands, known as the Painted Desert. These colourful hills contain a rich store of plant and animal fossils. Fossils are normally created when animal organisms are buried rapidly by sediment, thus protecting them from scavengers and natural decay.
It takes a unique circumstance to form even one fossil, and yet what we find on a worldwide norm is these incredible fossil graveyards similar to the petrified forest, where tens of thousands of organisms or millions of organisms are buried en masse in sedimentary rock, which is water-deposited sediments.
For catastrophists, fossil deposits throughout North America are the geological signature of a single event.
We find other fossil graveyards up in Canada at Drumheller, the Tyrrell Museum. We find Dinosaur National Monument here in the United States and many, many other locations where we find fossil organisms buried en masse. This is precisely the kind of evidence we would expect on a worldwide scale that would demonstrate that there really was a flood.
When people point to evidence of global catastrophes, such as using as an example petrified forest or Dinosaur National Monument, in a way they're correct. The dinosaur remains found at Dinosaur Monument are flood deposited, but they're river deposits. So you could say, well, that certainly was a flood. It was 150, 160 million years ago, but in a small river channel.
Mainstream scientists believe a regional catastrophe is the more likely cause of the petrified forest. And they raise doubts about the possibility of a flood of worldwide proportions. They estimate that water would have to be 6 miles deep over the surface of the Earth to cover every mountain. For that much water to accumulate in 40 days, it would require a rainfall of approximately 1,000 feet a day.
If you think of the entire Earth being covered, the other difficulty is the source of this water. It came from somewhere, piled up 6 miles deep, and then it went away. And so the question is, where did it come from and where did it go?
Since proving a worldwide catastrophe is difficult, most Noah's Ark believers keep their focus on the search for the remains of a great ship. This, they argue, would give them the definitive proof they need to convince their critics.
Noah's Ark would be the one remaining archaeological link to that pre-flood world, the greatest archaeological discovery that could ever be made.
And that takes explorers back to the Middle Eastern region specified in the Bible as the Ark's landing point. Mount Ararat in eastern Turkey is their prime destination. Not only does the mountain bear the name of the landing site mentioned in the Bible, it is also a rich landscape of unexplored gorges, cliffs and plateaus. Once an active volcano, it is now a sleeping giant.
The base of the mountain is about 3,000 feet elevation. The top of the mountain is at 17,000. That makes Mount Ararat, from bottom to top, one of the largest mountains in the world.
Over the years, John Morris has made 13 trips to Mount Ararat in search of Noah's Ark. He is well aware of the dangers, both natural and political, that come with the remote territory.
We've been arrested several times, thrown in jail a couple times, and been shot at quite a number of times. We were attacked. I got bullet holes in the tent and bullet holes in the car. Why would we continue with this? Well, I think the implications, the potential good from the discovery of Noah's Ark drives us on to continue.
Most intriguing are the local legends. In the last 200 years, dozens of people claim to have seen an unusual object in the mountain's higher reaches.
The thing that convinces me that something is up there is that all of these eyewitnesses, none of whom knew the others, and their stories are not related, not repeating something they've heard, all of them tell the same basic story. They describe it in the same fashion as a long linear barge, rectangular in shape, with a catwalk on the top and a very rugged area of the mountain. Everybody tells the same basic story. The details are different, as you would imagine, but the basic story is there, and this just convinces me something is up there that fits the general description and dimensions of the Ark as given in Scripture.
One such account comes from a shepherd named Georges Hagopian. His story dates back to 1908, when he was still just a young boy. After 4 straight years of drought, the ice cap had apparently receded, exposing fresh sections of rock and debris. One day, while climbing with his uncle, Georges stumbled across the upper section of a massive petrified vessel.
He claims that they piled up some rocks next to it, and because of the positioning of the ark and the rocks, were able to get him onto the top of it.
While his uncle watched from below, Georges walked along the large exposed roof. Peering inside, he tried to get a glimpse of the dark interior through small window-like holes that ran along the vessel's length.
And that he finally took his knife out and whittled out just a little piece of the wood itself. But he was adamant that he had actually walked on Noah's Ark, that he had touched it. He even said that 2 years later he went back and he saw it again.
Since George Hagopian, further rumors of sightings have come from a troop of Russian soldiers in 1917, as well as dozens of military pilots during the Second World War.
Even up to the 1960s and 70s, there's alleged eyewitnesses of U-2 photos that are classified in the government archives that are difficult to find. I mean, can you imagine how many photos the United States military and CIA and analysis crews have taken over the years?
With so many reported sightings, the long barge-like structure should be easy to locate. Yet Mount Ararat's unstable nature poses its own unique challenges. Ice and rock are constantly shifting, meaning Noah's Ark might be exposed in some years, yet buried in others.
Every year it's different, with the glacial melt, with the avalanches, with the earthquakes. I mean, the mountain just changes daily, and so if you've got one interesting site, you go there, you don't see it, you go back the next year, it's different, and something might be visible on another year that wasn't before.
And to survive the centuries relatively intact, the Ark would have to be both well hidden and well preserved.
If it's there, it's been protected somehow either by the glacier or the volcanic ash. Mount Ararat is a volcano. If the Ark were buried in volcanic ash, that's the perfect environment in which to petrify wood.
Recent attention has turned to the ice cap itself. Covering the top 3,000 feet of the mountain, its surface area spans approximately 12 square miles. Each year the ice shifts. It advances and recedes according to seasonal temperatures. If a vessel believed to be Noah's Ark is hidden on Mount Ararat, it must be well concealed in the higher reaches. The ice cap begins at an elevation of 14,000 feet. It's an inhospitable environment for research and exploration, but John Morris and his colleagues are drawn to it nonetheless.
Over the years, we had thought that the Ark, in order to be preserved, it would have to be frozen up in the ice cap, and we spent most of the time around the fringes of the ice cap looking at where a part of it might be sticking out every now and then on an unusually hot summer.
Mount Ararat's ice cap is made up of glacier formations that are constantly in flux. This poses a risk to any structure buried within.
Much of the ice cap is moving. There are basically areas that the survival of Noah's Ark, would be in doubt. But also there are some areas, where it is very stable and the ice pack is not moving at all.
One of those areas is the Eastern Plateau, a stationary ice pack up to 80 feet deep. If Noah's Ark did exist and landed on this mountain, it would have the best chance of surviving in this location. Dr. Charles Willis is no stranger to Mount Ararat's peak. He's president of the Ancient World Foundation based in California. In 1988, he led an expedition to the stable Eastern Plateau in search of Noah's Ark. It was one of the first to apply modern technology near the summit of the mountain.
We went to the mountain and we said, well, if it's hiding under the ice cap, we've got to explore the ice cap. So we had a metal detector, we had an under ice radar system, and we had an ice drill. Our ultimate goal, we theoretically thought, was we'd drill down into the deck of the Ark.
The easiest route up Mount Ararat is from the south. Between an elevation of 5,000 and 10,000 feet, the slopes are covered with fertile pasture. But beyond 10,000 feet, the land quickly turns inhospitable. High-altitude conditions prevail. In winter, temperatures on the upper slopes can easily reach 40 degrees below zero. Charles Willis's group, dubbed the Snow Tiger Team, built a base camp at 13,500 feet. From there, they worked their way up to the eastern plateau with their heavy load of equipment. Once established, a ground-penetrating radar was brought into play. The GPR probed for the remains of Noah's Ark by sending microwave signals deep into the ice. The signals bounced off solid objects and returned to the surface, creating a visual picture of what lay below. They were hoping it would reveal the outline of a large ship. Having plotted out their search area, the team began to crisscross the plateau, dragging the radar system back and forth. A number of anomalies appeared, stirring some interest, but they turned out to be nothing more than cracks in the ice.
The cracks are fractures in the ice caused by the ice movement. The ice is really
Other curious patterns pointed to what was possibly a buried caldera, the sunken basin that often gives volcano summits their distinctive shape. Apart from this, however, the expedition returned empty-handed.
Did a radar search, a metal detector search had already been done on the Eastern Plateau, and we drilled 3 holes 40 feet deep. We also radared all the way over to the peak, and there's nothing there. There's nothing in the Eastern Plateau site except 80 feet of ice. I guarantee it.
Despite Charles Willis's findings, another Noah's Ark enthusiast named Rex Geisler thinks this is hardly the end of the story. A computer scientist, Rex is the president of Ark Imaging, a company that employs modern technology in the search for ancient biblical treasures.
The radar worked perfectly. They got some great grids and some looks into the ice and really discovered that there was a caldera there, but that there was no anomalies or anything special in regard to Noah's Ark. But they stopped there, and they did not finish the task and complete the work of the entire ice cap.
Due to political unrest, Mount Ararat has been closed to most visitors since the First Gulf War in 1991. Yet Ark Imaging hopes to get permission to return soon. Along with archaeological exploration near the base, their key goal is to continue the radar search of the ice pack.
And there are other locations where people claim that Noah's Ark is buried underneath the ice, so we plan to do that. And if there is any survival of Noah's Ark or anything else man-made, then we plan to dig into the Ark itself.
Might Noah's Ark actually remain buried near the summit of Mount Ararat? And if so, has it been exposed by mild weather in the past, leading to clusters of eyewitnesses? Perhaps most intriguing is the appearance of this photo, captured by an American reconnaissance plane. Recently declassified, it draws attention to an unusual barge-like structure that was visible to the naked eye just over 50 years ago. It is known as the Ararat Anomaly. For years, this mysterious object has been referred to in intelligence circles as the Ararat Anomaly. Many believe it is a glimpse of Noah's Ark, which, according to legend, came to rest somewhere in eastern Turkey. Since this photo was taken, the ice cap on the top of Mount Ararat has shifted. Whether part of the anomaly might still be visible to an eyewitness on the ground is not currently known. Due to political tensions in the region, getting a closer look has proved difficult.
We've not been allowed to go back to the mountain all through the 90s, but it looks like it's going to start to open up again, and maybe soon somebody will get on there.
Until then, most researchers are at a dead end. To get permission to explore the mountain, they have to prove the scientific worthiness of their expedition. In a case where the object of study is still a mystery, meeting the criteria is certainly difficult. This restriction hasn't stopped one high-tech team from continuing the quest from afar. Noah's Ark enthusiasts have asked a company called Landinfo to help them examine the Ararat anomaly. Landinfo specializes in Geographical Information Systems, or GIS. GIS marries conventional mapping with digital technology.
We're trying to gather as much accurate information about Mount Ararat so that those that are researching it and studying this anomaly can go and actually prove and get up on the mountain.
If Noah's Ark isn't buried, satellite photos and three-dimensional maps may bring it into clearer focus. This could lead to permission from the Turkish government for a proper excavation.
It could historically be one of the largest discoveries in history.
Building a GIS profile of Mount Ararat starts with a traditional topographic map. It is scanned at high resolution and imported into mapping software. Elevations marked on the map are extracted until a three-dimensional image is created.
You're basically making a visual model of the world, a simulated model of the world, and because of the area of the world that we're in, not a lot of good information exists.
At this stage, the GIS file is just a skeleton of the mountain based on outdated maps. An image that reflects current ice and rock conditions must now be created. When the seasonal weather is right, aerial photographs will be taken and incorporated into the software. The final product may provide a detailed picture of the anomaly.
From that point, we'll be able to drape over the satellite imagery on the mountain so that we're able to identify the anomaly, exactly where its location is, and then remote sensing specialists can have a greater chance of knowing what the anomaly is.
But until the site is explored in person, any definite answers are unlikely. With so many failed searches in the past, skepticism is natural. Yet if something does turn up on Mount Ararat, it would be a great archaeological find. But its meaning would vary from person to person. For skeptics, it would be only a starting point, the beginning of a quest.
Ideally, scientists are open-minded, so we'd have to take a look at the evidence, and if the evidence is such that there's an ark on the top of the mountain, then I'm willing to change my views. But I would probably doubt that it'll be found.
For believers, however, it would be a validation of faith. It would be seen as proof of an entire history set down thousands of years ago in the book of Genesis.
I believe it's not myth or legend, but it's real history.
One thing is clear. In ancient times, something inspired stories of a great flood to take root in cultures around the world. The real cause of this phenomenon remains a mystery. And any evidence of Noah's Ark and the Great Flood, if they ever existed, may be lost in time. But as long as there are places left to explore in eastern Turkey and beyond, the search for answers will continue, and the legend of the great ship will endure.